avoid more attorney's fees. Too bad. If he ended up with less money to spend on his girlfriend, that wasn't her concern. Fists clenched, Zach snarled something under his breath. Probably just as well she couldn't hear it, Rosie decided, proud of her own display of self-control. "What makes you think we're capable of agreeing to anything without a mediator?" she asked sarcastically. "Fine," Zach muttered, with a pout reminiscent of their 9-year-old son. Staring at him now, Rosie had trouble believing she'd ever loved Zachary Cox. Not only was he smug and argumentative and self-righteous, he had no idea what it meant to be a husband and father. Granted, Zach was a handsome man. Not only that, his appearance proclaimed his success as a businessman, a professional. Although in her opinion, anyone with half a brain would instantly peg him for an accountant. He had that narrowed look about his dark eyes, as if he spent too many hours a day squinting at columns of tiny numbers. Despite that, he was appealing to the eye, with his broad shoulders, which nicely set off his expensive suit, and thick, dark hair. At one time he'd been an athlete, and even now he routinely jogged and kept in shape. Rosie had loved the firmness of his muscles as she stroked his back during lovemaking. Of course, it had been months since they'd slept in the same bed, and much longer since they'd actually made love. Rosie didn't even remember the last time. Had she known, she might have appreciated it more, lingered a moment longer at her husband's side, savored the feel of his arms around her. One thing was certain. Zach hadn't been interested in her from the day he'd hired Janice Lamond as his personal assistant. The thought of him entwined with Janice nearly suffocated Rosie, and she forcefully shoved the image from her mind. Anger and revulsion at her ex-husband's, unfaithfulness rose like bile in the back of her throat. Zach's raised voice caught her attention. Apparently he'd agreed to have their attorneys negotiate this added complication to their divorce decree. Otto was checking with the clerk for an empty conference room. Once a private room in the law library was secured, Zach and his attorneys sat at one side of the table, across from Rosie and hers. Even the attorneys seemed perplexed by the situation. "I can't say I've ever heard of such a decree before," Sharon said, starting the conversation. "Me neither," Otto frowned. "This is one for the books." "Fine," Zach said in a curt voice. "It's unusual, but we're both adults. We can figure this out. I know I was sincere about putting the children first." He glared at Rosie, as if to suggest she hadn't been. "If you were sincere, you would have had second thoughts about sleeping with that slut." Rosie hadn't intended to be argumentative, but if her ex-husband was so concerned about their children's welfare, he would never have broken his wedding vows. "I refuse to dignify that remark by responding to it," Zach said through gritted teeth. "Besides, if you were home more, instead of volunteering for every cause known to mankind, every cause except your children, you'd—" "Well, I refuse to allow you to blame me for what you've done." Her volunteer efforts were Zach's big complaint. He had his wish. She'd had to resign from every position she held and seek paid employment. She hoped he was happy. For the first time since their children were born, Rosie wasn't a stay-at-home mom. "I thought we were here to discuss this divorce decree," Zach asked with a bored look, an expression that was obviously for her benefit. "If we're going to trade insults, I'd rather not pay our attorneys to listen." "That's right," Rosie mused, deriving a small sense of satisfaction out of knowing that Zach was responsible for both sets of attorney's fees. He was the one with the high-paying job. She was currently taking summer classes to update her teaching certificate. Classes Zach was paying for. That was another notch in her belt, another concession granted in their divorce settlement. Her application was in with the South Kitsap School District, and considering all her connections, she shouldn't have any difficulty getting hired as a